So recently I was in need of a static web server. I wanted to find a really simple way of hosting files, something that would be easy to set up as well as maintain. And the first thing that came to mind was Heroku. So I decided to search their guides and see if there was any official way that they had to setting up a static website. And I came across this article, Creating Static Sites in Ruby with Rack. Unfortunately, the method that they have here just doesn't work. And I'll show you why. I've followed this guide to the letter, copied and pasted the code, and this is the result here. And you'll notice that it does serve the content, but doesn't matter what request you make, it's always going to return the exact same result. And you can see that that's actually by design. No matter what request is made to the server, it's always serving this same file. So if we go here, look in the console, we can see that no matter what we do, it's always going to return the same response. So it made the request to that page, SD, returned the index page. And even the request to the favicon that was made by the browser returned the same thing, that index page content. So that's not very useful. So we're going to scratch that and we're going to start over, and I'm going to show you how to actually create a real static site with Ruby and be able to host it on Heroku. So let's make our project directory. Just going to call it site. We're going to initialize an empty Git repository. And it's important that we do this first because Heroku needs a repository in order to work. And next we're going to create a new Heroku application. And we can do that either by logging into the website and doing that on the back end, or you can install the Heroku command line tools. And you can find out how to do that just by going to their website, search for CLI, and under this command line article, there's the whole URL right there, Heroku CLI. It shows you how to get that set up and install it. And once you have that set up, all you have to do is run Heroku create, and within a matter of seconds, you have a brand new Heroku application set up and ready to use. It's very easy to do, and you'll notice that it does two things here. It gives us a randomly generated name for our application, and it adds that as a remote for our Git repository. So that's very, very cool. And all we have to do to actually push this repository to Heroku is call git push Heroku master. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's how you push your code into production. So the first thing that we need to do now is we need to tell Heroku that we're going to be using Ruby to serve our files. And to do that, all you have to do is create a gem file. And when Heroku sees that gem file, it'll know that we have a Ruby server in our application directory. So let's go ahead and set that up. And I'm also going to tell Heroku which version of Ruby we're using. This is optional. You don't actually have to do this, but it silences a warning that gets kind of annoying if you see it pop up every single time you push your code to Heroku. I'm using version 2.2.3. You can use whatever version you want. Next we'll run bundle, and that is important because if we don't run bundle, then it won't create this gemfile.lock, and if Heroku doesn't see that gemfile.lock, it will reject the build and it won't work. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is actually create a directory that we can serve our files from. And conventionally that's done using a public directory, so we're going to do the same. And we need a file to serve, so we'll start with an index file. Just give it some content so we can test it out. And then finally we have to tell Heroku how to actually serve that content. With Ruby, it's actually possible to start up a static web server with only one single line of Ruby code. And Heroku makes it possible for us to tell it how to execute, what command to execute in order to start the web server. So using those two things, we can actually set up a static website on Heroku using only one line of code, which is very cool. So to do that, we'll create a proc file, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy the contents of that into the terminal here. And the way this works is quite simple. Over here, we tell Heroku what the name of the process that we're describing is, and then we give it a command to execute in order to start that process. And we could have as many processes as we want running in parallel with one another, but for our case, we only need the web server to be running, so we'll just add this one line. And what this line does is it calls Ruby, tells it to require a standard library called WebRick, and then it executes this line of code. And this line of code, what it does is it starts up it creates a WebRick HTTP server, binds it to port 3000 or the port that is described in a port environment variable, and it serves the files that are in the public directory, and then starts the web server instantly. It does that all in one line of code. It's not exactly pretty, but it gets the job done, so it works. So let's go ahead and push this up to Heroku and test that everything worked the way that we wanted it to. Let's go ahead and push. And we can see that it detects that it's a Ruby application because it found that gem file. It bundled the gem file, found that there were no dependencies, and now it's starting up the server. And it does it very quickly because it's a very, very simple task. So in just 1 minute, we'll be able to open this and run it in the web browser, and I can show you how it works. Okay, took a few seconds. Alright, so we'll just run Heroku open. And there we go. We can see that it works. And if we try to go to something that isn't there, we get a WebRick not found error. Okay. Very, very simple. So the next thing we want to know how to do is to develop this on our local machine, because we don't want to have to push our code to Heroku every single time we want to preview one small change. And the way we can do that, if we open up our gem file, all we have to do is add a gem called foreman, which is the same gem that Heroku uses to actually execute the processes that are in that proc file. And we want to make sure that we tell Heroku that this is for our development group and that it doesn't actually have to install that gem on its side. Run bundle, and then all we have to do is run foreman start, and it starts our server locally. Now you'll notice that it's actually started on port 5000, and if you look in the proc file, we told it to use port 3000 unless something was set in this port environment variable. If we look at that environment variable, we see it's empty, so it should be using 3000. And the reason it's using 5000 is because foreman actually sets this port variable for us, and if we want to start it up on a different port, we have to tell foreman to start on a different port, and then it'll run on the port that we wanted it to. So if we go to localhost 3000, we can see that our web server is running. And we can see that I actually made those the requests for those files here. Now we can see that it says error, favicon not found. So let's go ahead and create that. And the next time we run it, refresh the browser, and we'll notice that we didn't get that error this time. Of course, it didn't request it. You can press Shift and refresh, and we can see that it requested it, and it actually did return that fave icon. So there you go. Just like that, you get a web server set up on Heroku using only one line of code. The rest of it is just the typical standard overhead that you would need to get any project started. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.